those nations when it comes to religion, right? So how are people characterizing this particular kind of uh, we can say that religion is necessarily a part of culture in those nations. This is because people will have similar beliefs in that particular nation, and this will lead to certain common talking points. For example, there's a region in which religion ABC is very prevalent, right? And the people over there are like particularly very religious. Then in that particular region, since everyone is religious, they will have similar beliefs, and this will have like and the religious basis and religious scriptures will be like common talking points of those particular people, right? And when this happens, you form like common bases, you have like common interactions, and religion gets induced into the culture of that particular region, right? Moreover, when like most of the people are very religious, then you have regular meetings, particularly in churches, temples, mosques, etc. And you conduct rituals together. And when you're doing any kind of activity together, it forms some sort of bonding. Now, due to these two religion becomes a part of culture in those nations, right? So, what did I do over here? Did I give any kind of argument? Did I like show some kind of impact? No, I'm not like necessarily doing any kind of argumentation over here, but I'm like setting the grounds for the debate. I'm showing I'm describing a picture of how the world looks like. I'm describing a picture of how religion looks like, and how religion is like has like correlations with culture, and religion becomes a part of culture itself, right? This has like nothing to do with any kind of like, this is not an impact or argument, but this might have a significant impact on whatever argument or impact I'm trying to give in future, right? So characterization is important in this sense. Now, another characterization we can do in this kind of motion is that how do the atheists look like? We can say that in such nations, the atheists are socially excluded. Now, it will be very difficult for the adjudicator to buy if you just say that, oh, the atheists are socially excluded and move on to your argument, right? You also need to justify as to why are they socially excluded. Uh, Now, probably there can be 2 points. One, the religious people perceive that the atheists do not follow any kind of morals and indulge in immoral activities. This is because they are not following the religion, and this leads to formation of some kind of stigma in the society. And when this happens, people don't probably want to talk to the atheists, they don't want to interact with the atheists, and when this happens they feel very socially excluded, right? So again, I'm not like giving any argument, I'm just trying to characterize how these atheists look like, how their behavior in the society looks like, how their relations with the other people look like, and these might be very important for the arguments that I might be forming in future. I'll take any doubts if you have right now.
So, could you please explain what exactly characterization is? Because in the starting it was a little too fast. So,
Perfect, perfect. So I'll go to the previous slides and repeat once again. Apart from that, is there any doubt in the example I gave? Cool. So what exactly is characterization? It is essentially a picture or visualization of how the world looks like. So whenever you're debating and there's a motion, then there are two worlds. There is world of the proposition and there is the world of the opposition. Both the worlds are drastically very different from each other, right? And for like setting the basis of the arguments, you need to describe how those worlds look like. Now, in those worlds, there will be various stakeholders. You need to describe how the stakeholders look like, what their behavior is, what their incentives are, and when you're doing this, you are characterizing the individual. Let us like do like analyze the English of this particular word. Characterize comes from character, right? Every character has some kind of character traits. In characterization, you're doing nothing but defining the character traits of those of that particular character, and that character can be anything or anyone. It can be an object, it can be an individual, it can be an organization, it can be a nation. In international relation motions, it can be probably a political party which is like governing that particular country, or the stakeholders in that particular debate. Those are the characters, and when you're providing character traits of those particular characters, that is characterization. And it might not necessarily be individuals only or groups only, but can also be like general sentiments like religious groups, religion, atheists, etc. So, when in the example I characterize atheists and religious people, these atheists are like a small group of people, and now I'm describing them how they exactly look like, right? So, this is an example of characterization. Which yes, doubts.
Essentially, what is the use of characterization in debates?
Cool. So, let's say you're giving any argument, right? That argument has various layers. You have a particular claim. Uh, for example, the claim can be that country XYZ will not accept any refugees from country ABC, right? And you claim that it should not accept any refugees. So, for like explaining that, you need to explain how that country looks like. What is the uh, what is the landscape in that particular country which does not allow it to accept refugees? And when you're describing that particular country, you are characterizing that particular country. And why is it important? Because uh, understand that there can be various subjective interpretations in a debate. Like there's a spectrum of subjectivity and there's no objective truth. That is why you're debating on that particular topic. And when there is no objective truth, but like a scale of subjectivity, then the arguments can tilt on any side. So, like to make it very clear, give some kind of context to your argument, you need to characterize it. You need to characterize the people, you need to characterize the stakeholders, you need to characterize the ideologies that are there in the that are present in the debate, right? So this is the importance of characterization. Um, is it clear now?
Yes.
And like those who are not able to understand what is characterization, is it like uh, good?
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Sir, if the topic is that dictatorship should be bad or dictatorship is wrong form of government, so the government side will present its own world of how dictatorship should be banned, and how and the against or the opposition side will describe its own world where dictatorship exists.
Cool. So let's like narrow now down the motion a little bit. Um,
Excuse me.
Let me answer this particular question, then I'll like go to the next question, right? Cool. So let's say the topic is the House opposes dictatorial regimes, right? So in this, the government has to present a picture that dictatorships are bad, right? So in that particular kind of like motion, the government will describe the dictatorship to be bad, and that kind of describing is characterization. You're not giving any arguments, right? You're not like properly proving anything mechanistically. You're not leading to any impacts. You're just describing it. You, for example, you have a friend. You know, right? That particular friend is good or bad. Would have certain like very specific traits, like being kind, being very rude, etc., etc. So when you're like describing those individuals like this, that is called characterization. And when you do this for debate topics, when you do it for the objects that are present in the debate, that is called characterization. Um, is it clear now? Any other doubts?
I would like to ask that is stereotypes can be the part of a characterization.
True, stereotypes can be a part of characterization, but then they also need to be justified. In this particular slide, what did I explain? The first thing that you need to do is that you need to uh, give your statement of characterization, and then you need to justify as to why that characterization is correct, right? So if you're giving like some stereotypes and like are mentioning that stereotype exists, then you also need to justify as to why those stereotypes exist and why those stereotypes are very prevalent in that particular nation. Right.
Understood. Yep.
Cool. So all the other doubts I'll take uh, after like a few slides. Right. So let's go on to the next example. This will like make things more clear. The example of the motion is this house opposes the narrative that parents should sacrifice themselves for their children. Right. So, who are the what are the keywords in this particular motion? Narrative is a keyword. Now, what do you mean by a narrative? A narrative is essentially a general sentiment or a general like story that is floating in the society. So, when we say that there is a narrative of something in that particular society, it is that people really want to do that, or people are forcing you to do that, and there's this whole kind of story around this particular thing should happen. So when you say that there is a narrative that parents should sacrifice themselves, then in that particular society, parents are actively encouraged by the people around them. Parents are actively encouraged by the uh, family members, by their elders, that they should sacrifice themselves for their children. Right. So this is the definition of a narrative. Narrative is an important word in this particular motion. And what are the like important stakeholders? The parents are the stakeholders, and the children are the stakeholders, right? So uh, in this particular situation, right, yes, in this particular situation, uh, we need to characterize how the narrative impacts parents and how does this sacrifice look like. Now, from this motion, it might not be very clear that sacrifice, what does sacrifice mean? What does sacrifice actually look like? What all will the parents do to sacrifice, right? So in that particular scenario, you need to explain how, like, what all actions will be done by the parents for the sacrifice, right? So you can probably say that sacrifice might look like not going on vacations, but staying back at your home to take care of your children, to teach them for their examinations. This is a kind of sacrifice. So you need to explain how the sacrifice looks like, because from the motion itself, it is unclear that sacrifice, what kind of sacrifice is happening. Is it like a bodily sacrifice, like are they dying or something, or is it like some other kind of sacrifice? So that kind of characterization, that kind of like description of what a sacrifice looks like qualifies as a characterization, right? So once you do the characterization of how a sacrifice looks like, you need to explain how the sacrifice looks like from the perspective of the parents and from the perspective of the children. I already explained how it looks like from the perspective of the parents. From the perspective of the children, it probably might look like children are seeing their parents too much. Children are being controlled by their parents too much. They haven't like they have an active supervision, etc., etc. So this is like a characterization of sacrifice from the perspective of children. Um, right. Another important thing is that you need to ensure that whatever characterization you're doing is realistic. Now, the government cannot come up and say that, oh, the sacrifice looks like that the parents might die in order to save the children. No, that is not a good characterization, because, like, in general, when we talk about sacrifices of parents, we usually do like intuitively don't talk about bodily sacrifices. We talk about sacrifices in various events, like going out, enjoying, probably going out to restaurant without their children when their children have an exam the other day, etc., etc. That kind of sacrifice is very intuitive, but the government cannot come up and say that sacrifice means dying, right? That is like a very extreme characterization, which is not likely to be true. So what also you need to understand is that this kind of characterization has to be realistic and easy to accept. Any doubts in this particular example?
So I
And
want.
yes.
So how exactly is the opposition or the person speaking about characterization present these means points? Like how will he tell them? How will he convey them?
Okay, how will characterization be conveyed? So are you guys familiar with the format of an APD?
So we were told about it yesterday, or we were given a gist about the parliamentary debate, the Asian parliamentary debate.
Cool, cool, cool. So you were told that like in a nation parliamentary debate, there are two sides, the proposition and the opposition. Now each side has three speakers, the first speaker, the second speaker, and the third speaker. Now it is the responsibility of the first speaker to do the characterization. You can see that characterization is kind of an introduction to the debate, right? Because you're describing things. You're not giving arguments, you're describing things. So it is kind of an introduction. So those characterizations are to be given by the prime minister or the leader of opposition. A leader of opposition is the first speaker of the opposition, right? And the prime minister is the first speaker of the government. So these characterizations are either usually given by the first speaker, or these characterization might be given just before a particular argument, right? Uh, for example, in this particular motion, if I want to give the argument that um, when parents start sacrificing for their children, their mental health becomes bad, and they are probably not able to, they probably become very angry at the child because now their personal mental health is being sacrificed for taking care of their children, right? This is an argument, and this is like a decent argument by the government which can hold in the debate, right? Now, in order to give some kind of context as to like why will the mental health go bad, why will the parents not be able to cope up, you need to describe like how will this sacrifice look like. You need to explain that this sacrifice will take a mental toll on the people, on the children. And for that you need to explain how the sacrifice looks like, what is exactly the sacrifice. And when you're doing this, that like part of the debate is called characterization. It is like not essentially a different speaker, like a particular speaker just characterizing, or like a different part of the debate. It is like something which is very common in debates. It is just a way of like mentioning out that okay, this part is called characterization, this part is called argumentation, this part is called impacts. So it is just part of your speech, right? Now I'll go on to the next argument. I'll take
I
no
was
doubts
dubious
after this
about that.
particular slide.
Okay, sir.
I'll take all the doubts after this particular slide, right? We'll take one more example to increase the clarity as to how, like, what characterization means. The motion is this house supports countries paying other countries to take in immigrants or refugees. So this is probably like uh, refugees came from Myanmar to Bangladesh, and now Bangladesh will pay India to take those refugees which came into Bangladesh, and India will accept those refugees. Like this is like an example to this particular motion and how the motion will look like. The government side will have to describe which countries will accept the immigrants, right? Now, which countries will probably pay the other countries to accept the immigrants. When you're doing this kind of introduction, when you're doing this kind of uh, description, that is characterization. Moreover, you need to describe what these countries look like, right? The countries will probably pay other nations for taking in refugees. They'll probably be the countries who don't want refugees in the nation. Why do they not want refugees in their nation? Probably because they don't have the resources, they don't have the land to like actually keep these refugees. So this can be a characterization of the country, right? You're describing the country to be a country which does not have any kind of excessive land for the refugees, excessive resources for the refugees. This is a characterization of the country which is sending refugees to other nations. Moreover, characterization can also include other nuances. For example, why will they accept refugees for money? Right? Why will another nation probably accept other refugees for money? What kind, like do they have enough resources or not to take other refugees? Right? So there's a condition that a particular nation might just accept refugees for money, even if they don't have any resources. For example, Pakistan. Pakistan is a nation which has which their economy is like pretty bad right now. They have taken a lot of loans from China, and they're like they're in dire need of money. So countries like these who don't have money, these countries, what they can do is, in order to get money, they can like take in refugees just because they want the money, even if they don't have the resources to take care of the refugees. So this can be a good characterization of a nation who is taking in refugees for money from the proposition side, right? Doubts.
So, at what part of the debate will characterization be included?
Characterization can happen. Okay, it is pretty like subjective, right? Some debaters do it in the first half of the like in the first speaker. So probably the prime minister can come up, first characterize, and then give like other arguments. Or probably the leader of opposition can come in, give the characterization from their side of the debate, and then probably rebut the characterization of the prime minister, right? So probably the first speaker can do the characterization, or alternatively, you can do the characterization just before the argument only. For example, the second speaker is introducing a new argument, right? So they can characterize the important things of that particular argument just before that argument. So there's no strict like rules as to when to characterize, but it is usually recommended that the first speaker do the characterizations, because early on in the debate only the context and the basic like axioms can get sorted out, the characterization can get sorted out. So it is usually recommended that the first speakers do the characterization. uh, any doubts?
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Suppose a speaker is actually giving a characterization about a particular thing. So the characterization should be actually more of brief, like more of objective, or should it be rather subjective?
Hmm. uh, so try to understand that in debates there is nothing objective. You can never give an answer as to yes or no to any question, right? Everything is subjective. And since things are subjective, we are having this debate. If it would have been objective, we would not be having the debate. So obviously, any characterization is subjective only. There is this range of subjectivity, and then you pick that which like subjective argument is better for you, which subjective characterization is better for your side, and then give a subjective characterization. You cannot give an objective characterization per se. Uh,
But
after
like
like
sometimes we are
yes.
actually, like for the opposite side, when we are speaking too much about a particular thing, for the opposite side, it actually becomes a beneficial point that they're trying to actually, trying to, make such points or actually refute us back from such questions or anything. So how is it actually beneficial when it is more of subjective and not objective?
I think I didn't understand your question. What do you exactly mean by subjectivity and objectivity?
By subjectivity, I mean more of description I'm giving about a characterization of a particular thing. And more
I,
of like if I'm saying objective, then I'm not saying that yes or no questions. But for objective, I'm actually speaking more less about the thing.
oh, so in a debate, I think it is very important to uh, give the most details, right? Because the more you explain a particular thing, the easier it is for the adjudicator to understand what you're saying. Because understand that an adjudicator is not supposed to be a very learned individual who has like a huge amount of knowledge of probably economics, politics, etc., etc. Like even if the adjudicator is a lawyer, he is supposed to act in such a way, he's supposed to judge in such a way that they are an average voter, any average individual you see around you, right? So the more description you give about a particular topic, the more detailed you like make your argument, the more detailed you make your characterization or description, the better it is, right? So it is like not recommended to be objective and just tell that okay, this individual is kind and probably very helpful. Okay, why? The adjudicator will not understand as to why this individual is kind and helpful, right? You need to give a description and detailed analysis as to why you claim you put forward this particular claim. So description and subjectivity is very important in any debate. Any other questions? At this point, I'll take like all the questions that are present and then go on to the next section.
Sir, I was dubious about the example which you gave, sir. Sir, because it was stated that we must always have a practical or a pragmatic outlook when it comes to characterization. So, sir, in that example, it was stated that if the society is a non-radical religious society, so their atheists were feeling exclusivistic. So, but if the society is non-radical, so it is fundamentally a non-xenophobic or a non-alienophobic society which doesn't believe in proselytization. So, how can we actually realistically say that atheists are exclusivistic in that society?
Cool. Right. So understand that I said that they are not radically religious, which means that probably they'll not hate the atheists, or probably they'll not like uh, kill the atheists, right? But they understand that they're significantly religious. This means that they're actively following religious procedures. They are like reading the scriptures, etc., etc. So what will eventually happen is that how are friend groups and social group formed? They are probably formed on the basis of some common understanding or common ideologies that you have, right? You might have like something very common traits between you and your friends, and that is why you're good friends, and you like them because of that. The religious people, they'll form groups amongst themselves, and like probably interact much more to religious people than to atheist people, just because they share common ideals, they share common morals, they share common topics of speaking. They go to regular meets in temples, mosques, etc., right? And when they're like doing things together, they form bonds. That is why they're able to like gel together very well, and that is why they become like very close. And when this happens, and when it is tough for a like religious person to interact with an atheist person, then atheists like usually become socially excluded. So this can be one form of characterization. Moreover, like even though they are not very radical, those religious people are not radical, they would still think that the atheist people are probably people who are not following the uh, morals that are prescribed in their in their like religious scripture, right? Let's say a religious scripture says that drinking alcohol is bad, and that significantly religious person is like uh, very like true to that and is following that, then then they would probably believe that the atheist person does not believe in this particular scripture, and he might consume alcohol. So like it is a common perception, it is perceived that if a particular person is not following a particular religion, then they are opposed to that religion, they'll not follow the morals prescribed in that particular religion, and that is why there will be some form of stigmatization. So even though like it will not be very extreme, like people will not start killing atheist people, or they'll not start rejecting them from university applications, but there will be some kind of soft narrative which will lead to them being excluded from the society. So I think this is a pretty plausible characterization.
No,
Excuse
but
me.
in my perspective, the society, because it is a non-radical society, because of it only the atheism is existing, and because of it only they are believing in the nihilistic philosophy of life, or we can say they are agnostic towards the life because the society is allowing them to do so. So, how come we can say that they are a very integral and an inclusive part of the society?
Okay, now this like becomes a debate in and of itself, right? You can debate for the opposition, I can debate for the proposition. So I think we like conclude with the like slides I have, and then we can have a debate later on. Right. So any other doubts?
Yes.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
So regarding this motion, this supports countries which one. So the last point is which countries will pay other countries to accept immigrants. So could you give examples of countries or what type of countries will pay
Cool.
other?
So okay, I can obviously give examples, right? But uh, the proposition will say something else, the opposition will say something else. So it is like important for you to think that from both the sides, what can be this kind of characterization. A
Yes.
very plausible characterization that comes from my like superficial analysis is that countries which don't have the resources to cater to these refugees will like reject these refugees and pay other countries to accept immigrants. For example, you know about the Rohingya crisis that is happening, right? The Rohingya Muslims are migrating from Myanmar to Bangladesh, but Bangladesh has like a huge population explosion, like has a huge population, but a very small area. They don't have the resources to actually cater to these refugees. So Bangladesh might be one nation which might be willing to pay another country to send off the refugees so that they're able to reduce the number of people they have, reduce the resource crunch, etc., etc. Now, this is something one side might argue. The other side can argue something else. They can say that these can also be elitist nations, for example, European nations, who do not want probably religion, like refugees of a particular religion to come into their country, right? And these countries will not accept refugees and give it to other nations for money. This can be another kind of characterization, and this is also a very plausible characterization.
Thank you, sir.
Any other doubts? Cool. So, considering there are no doubts, I'll go on to the next slide. Some important things to keep in mind.
Excuse
You
me,
need
sir.
to stop. Okay, one important thing like you need to keep in mind is that when I'm speaking, please don't interrupt me. When I specifically ask for doubts, only then ask doubts, right? So, all the doubts after this, I'll take after this particular slide. Cool. So, important things when you're doing characterization. Stop thinking of actors and monoliths. What are monoliths? Monoliths. Okay, let's do like the dichotomy of this particular term. Mono means singular. Actors and as monoliths can be like you're seeing a particular person as a function of themselves. That is, that particular person is just controlled by whatever they want. This is like characterizing an actor as a monolith. Um these are the individuals who are like largely controlled by them. But what you need to realize is that an individual is not controlled by themselves, but the people around them also. For example, I as an individual, I am also controlled by the society I am living in, the government, the political party who is forming the government, the people who are making the laws, the people around me, for example, my friends, my family, etc. My beliefs are also a function of whatever they preach me or whatever interactions I have with the society. Right. So this is something very important to keep in mind whenever you're doing any kind of characterization. Don't think of a country or a group of people and as individuals. Think them as a group of people who are interacting with each other, and those interactions are like having some kind of conclusive impact. Right. Um, so right. For example, let's say you are doing a characterization of a political party. Political parties have like very complex structures. There are people who are controlling the political party. Then there are people who are at the lower rungs of the political party. Then there are people who are supporters of the political party. So there are various types of individuals in a political party. So when you're characterizing a political party, describing a political party, it is not important. It is important for you to take into account those people also, interaction between those people also, those diverse type of people in that political party also when you're doing the characterization. When you're analyzing, let's say, countries, right? uh, Countries include the head of state, that is either the prime minister or the president. Then you have the bureaucracy. Then you have the judiciary. Then you have the executives. Executives being the IAS officers, IES officers who are probably making the laws of the country, right? These are like different individuals who are part of the same nation, and these might have like different kind of characterization. So you just cannot see a country as very individualistic in nature. Rather, you should like divide that country into various sub actors and characterize those sub actors and accordingly characterize the country, because like seeing the country as very individualistic and only characterizing the country according to the prime minister might be a flawed characterization, because then you're not taking into account other factors, other variables, right? Any doubts in this particular part?
Sir, I've not understood this point very well.
Cool. Right, so you're an individual. If I want to characterize you, I will not only characterize you as individualistic, right? I will not characterize your individualistic properties, but also the properties which help you interact with others in the society, which means that you are largely a function of the people around you. Your people, the people around you, the political parties around you, have an influence in whatever decision you are making. For example, let's say elections were just concluded, right? Uh, Before that, there were various news channels. If a particular person is watching news channels, then their decisions or their probably state of mind might be a function of whatever the channel is telling them. They might be like controlled by the news channels. Whatever they are saying might form an impact in the minds of the people. So it is wrong if you describe individuals as singular personalities, but you need to describe individuals as a function of everything that is there in the society, right? Everything they are impacted by. Same goes to groups like political parties, nations. In nation, there are different kind of people. You need to take into account all those people, or like majority of those people, when you're characterizing, etc. Is it clear now? Any other doubts?
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Sir, are you presenting your screen or it's from my side the network issue?
Uh, it's showing me that I'm presenting my screen. Or can anyone else confirm?
Yes, sir, your screen
Yes,
is
sir, your
visible.
screen is visible.
Perfect. I think there's some connection issue
Okay,
from your
sir.
side, so you can probably rejoin and cool. So since there are no doubts, I heard a raise hand emote. Is there a doubt? Considering none, and move forward about social movements. Social movements, for example, feminism, the LGBTQ plus movement, influence the behavior of organizations and individuals. Right. So whenever you're characterizing, let's say, a business, a company, right? Let's say a big company like Amazon, you want to characterize that particular nation, or that particular company, then you also need to take into account what might impact them. Like feminist movement impacts corporates. Why? Because if they are mistreating the people, like the female in their company, then they will have some kind of backlash by these social movements. Right. Similarly, the LGBTQ movement, if they're not respecting the rights of the people who come under LGBTQ bracket, then they will face some kind of backlash. So when you're characterizing, and it's like a motion which relates to feminism or which relates to corporates and feminism, you also need to characterize the interaction between these people, interaction between these two entities. And that is also to be taken into account and done in the characterization. Right. So I think this point regarding active, yes, doubt.
So when we say that stop thinking actors as the monoliths or the megaliths of the society, so sir, do we mean that in a debate we don't have to state examples or proclamations or pronouncements by actors or governors?
Yes, like examples are not very important. Like examples might sometimes be important in a debate, but they might be bad for you. Why? Because examples are very specific. When you're giving a particular example, that might be specific to a particular situation or specific to a specific circumstance, right? And might not capture the generality of the characterization you're doing. So when you're giving examples, you might not be able to capture the generalization, which might like defeat your characterization, and the opposition can easily come up and say that, oh, this is a very specific example, but in a general case it does not function in this particular manner, but in a general case it is something else, and in that particular condition your example will fail, right? So giving examples during characterization might not always be correct, but then you can substantiate your logical claims via examples. I'll come to this later on in my slides. I have covered this in detail later. Any other doubts? Right. So I'll go to the next point. Stop thinking of all actors as inherently rational. A rational individual is an individual who takes in all the factors, all the circumstances, all the possible futures, and makes a decision or forms opinion very accordingly. So a rational actor is someone who is not very realistic. The people in the society are not inherently extremely rational. They might be rational to a particular extent, but if you try to characterize an individual as extremely rational individual who will like take his decision on the basis of all the factors and information that is presented to him or her, that is like a wrong kind of characterization, right? Various emotions like anger, grief, guilt, love, confusion, lack of information, etc., like influence the final decision of that particular individual. And that decision might not be rational considering that these particular emotions. A particular person might be angry at a particular circumstance, and due to which he might not be able to form a good decision, might not be able to think rationally. So, what is good that whenever you're characterizing a particular individual, take a middle ground. Don't assume them to be completely rational. Don't assume them to be completely irrational. Take them to be a quasi-rational person who is like capable of taking decently simple choices rationally, but the complex choices might not be like very rational in nature, and he might be like controlled by these emotions. So you need to take like this into account, because this is a huge mistake which various debaters do. They assume that all humans are rational and make their arguments accordingly, but then this is a highly refutable argument wherein the opposition can come in and say that, oh, individuals are not rational, we have hormones which control our decision making, which is not very rational or logical. Right. This was pretty simple, so I'll go on to the next. Comes to the example. Consider the most general case. Don't restrict the characterization by giving a highly specific example. Sometimes debaters tend to characterize by stating examples or past incidents. This might be a very specific case, which cannot be like interpolated to a more general case. So rather than just stating examples for characterization, rely more on justification and characterization, like a justification of the characterization. So if I want to characterize a particular nation, let's say China, then I'll not give a very specific example that, oh, 100 years ago China did this, that is why China is a nation like this. Or probably 50 years ago, in a very specific situation, China took this particular decision, passed this particular law, that is why China is characterized in this particular format. That is very flawed, because that might be a very specific circumstance that might have happened due to specific circumstances, but in general China might not look like that. So what is recommended is that whenever you are giving certain kind of characterizations, what you do is you give a general justification, general logic, and then in order to justify the logic, you give some kind of example or intuition pump. Uh, Importance can be used to support the logic, but examples alone cannot qualify as characterizations. Be as general as possible with the characterization. This is, I think, also pretty clear. Any doubts?
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
So, sir, in general, we need to talk about anything like according to the topic, if we're taking an example.
Yes. Also, by general, I don't mean that if a motion is specific, go to the generalization of the motion. No. If the motion is very specific, and you know what a context slide is, a context slider is a like slide which is given before the motion to give you some kind of context about the motion, right? So if there's something very specific mentioned in the motion, or in the context slide, you don't need to generalize that. You need to talk about that thing in specific, but then uh, you don't need to make a specification of that specific thing, right? Cover everything that comes under the scope of the debate, cover everything that comes under the scope of the specific motion that is given, but don't take a very specific case of that general motion. Understood?
So, for example, if we take the example of that refugee movement, that refugees accepted by India. So, in general, we need to talk about that there's overpopulation in India, there's unemployment, and there it would be further aggravated if the refugees join like that.
No. So when I talk about India only, I'm taking a specific example, right? Refugees can be accepted by any nation, right?
No,
uh,
sir, in the motion it is given. In the motion it is given India accepting the refugees.
Oh, acha, so you're talking about a separate movie, that is. Cool. So, if it is mentioned that India is then that is quite specific. Then you're talking very specifically about India. So you talk about the specific economic stances of India. You talk about the specific um, law policy or probably resource allocation that happens in India. So there you can go specific. But over here in this example, we're talking about countries in general. So you cannot like make it very specific to India or make it very specific to Bangladesh or the Myanmar crisis. You need to take a most generic circumstance that can be applied to all the examples. Understood?
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Cool. So considering we are running out of time, I'll be open to doubts less frequently. I'll probably go through three, four slides and then take the questions. Right. Um, right. This is covered. How do you structure characterizations? 4 points. One, assertion. Two, justification. Three, likelihood analysis, and four, implications. What is an assertion? Assertion is something that you're claiming. For example, person XYZ is a very kind individual, or a particular nation is very homophobic in nature, or a particular nation is xenophobic in nature, right? That is a claim. That is characterization, right? Now you go on to the justification because I, as the adjudicator, need to understand why what you're saying is correct because I don't know why what you're saying is correct. Right? You need to justify it. You need to show why it is true. Provide context, reasoning. Sometimes examples also work if the examples are not too specific or niche. Then you show that the likelihood of your characterization is very high. So, what might be an alternative that an opposition will propose, and why is it likely that our characterization will prevail? When you, as a government, are giving the characterization, then certain characterization might come from the opposition side also. So, you in your arguments can probably do say that the opposition said XYZ, we said ABC, our characterization is more likely because of these reasons. Because understand that various characterizations can be plausible and true as well. So, in that particular level of subjectivity, in that particular spectrum of subjectivity, what you need to understand is you need to prove the probability and likelihood, and that happens when you're comparing two things. So, whenever you're like in a debate, you're comparing two characterizations, you need to prove the likelihood of your argument or characterization prevailing over the other alternative. Then implication. This is like pretty straightforward. Clearly highlight the impacts of the characterization. What that characterization leads to, how is it like unique, how does it help in your argument building, etc. etc. That is pretty clear. How to make them realistic. As I explained earlier, you don't need to be very extremist. You need to like take a very middle ground and make it very realistic, and so that the adjudicator is able to accept what you're saying. That if you like say something which is very extreme and the adjudicator is not able to accept it, then it is bad, right? So you need to make it realistic. You can make it realistic by giving intuition prompts. For example, framing your characterization in such a manner that it comes very intuitively to a common average voter. So adding some kind of intuition or intuitive example might help. Then breaking it down to its most basic axiom. What is an axiom? I think you would have studied in your grade 10 or grade 9 mathematics. That axiom is a basic statement that cannot be questioned, which cannot be like, which cannot be disputed, right? So there's no reasoning behind that axiom. That axiom just exists. In debates also, there are various axioms that you can just say that are true. You don't need to justify them. So whatever reasoning, whatever characterization or assertion you're giving, you need to ask various whys and justify them to the extent that it comes down to the basic axiom and there's like no more justification required. That is breaking a particular argument down to its very basic argument axiom. Powerful storytelling. You need to be a good storyteller to explain that particular characterization. You can probably imagine yourself to be a part of that particular story, part of that particular world, part of that particular country or civilization, and then say that, let's say I am an individual, I will face these circumstances, etc., etc. So be a part of the story, explain how the narrative will work, how the narration will work, and that like powerful storytelling can help you a lot in characterization. then obviously like reading a lot about social topics, political topics, economic topics, and extremes will help you a lot in making the characterization realistic. So these are the four main points. Before this, I'll take doubts. Are there any doubts?
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Sir, the axiom that you were talking about, are those rhetoric questions?
No, axioms are like very basic thing, right? For example, killing another individual is bad. This is an axiom. Like I cannot say no, killing other people is not bad, right? So something that the opposition cannot contest and is very basic, that is an axiom. Or let's say bullying is bad. That is like pretty evident, self-explanatory. You don't need to justify why bullying is bad. That is decently obvious. So I think those are the basic axioms. And what you can do is bring your like ask a chain of whys. Let's say you say China is a country which abuses racial and religious minorities. This is like a characterization. Why? Why does this happen? For this, you can like give examples. Those examples are like facts, so they cannot be contested. That is an axiom, right? Or probably person XYZ is kind. Why are they kind? You can give like some kind of generalized set of events. If you give one event and try to prove that they are kind, then that might not be true because they might be kind in one specific instance. But to prove that a particular person is kind, you need to show that how over a period of time they have not done any activity which is not kind, or the like frequency of activities which are not kind to individuals is very low or near to zero. Right. So those are like basic things that cannot be contested. So you need to bring like ask enough whys. You need to ask whys again and again until you are able to come to a basic point which cannot be contested. And like when you include the answers to those whys in your mechanizations, in your characterizations become stronger. Any other doubt?
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
So what do you mean by an intuitive example?
So intuition is something which comes like very naturally to me or an average individual. Again, intuition is that uh, killing people is bad. This is like pretty intuitive. नहीं लोगों को नहीं मारना. ठीक है, this is pretty intuitive. Or genocide is bad. It is bad. I cannot contest this. This is something which is very intuitive, right? So this is an intuition pump. When you justify your characterization via some intuitive example, via an example which is like pretty relatable to you, pretty relatable to real life circumstances, that is like an intuitive example or intuition form.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Something that makes your argument more relatable to the real world. As simple as that.
Okay, sir.
Cool. Any other doubts? Seeing none, I go to the next part, that is rebutting characterizations. Now you like debate, the government will come up with an characterization. The prime minister will come and they like probably characterize the motion in 2 3 minutes, and then they'll probably go to the argumentation. The leader of opposition comes in. Now, what is important? They need to rebut their characterization. For rebutting the characterization, it is important that you don't concede to any characterization of the opposition just because it is intuitive, right? So something might seem very intuitive to you that is said by the other side, but that might not be true, right? So you need to, and like this might haunt you later in the debate, and you might see that oh, you conceded to a particular characterization, and that is why you are losing this debate. So that is why whatever the opposition says, you need to critically analyze it, right? Whatever the other side says, you need to pick out each and every statement, each and every claim, critically analyze whether it is true or false, and like then form rebuttals for that particular characterization. Second, expose their faulty characterization and justify and reason out as to why it is wrong or unrealistic. Just saying that, oh, XYZ said by the other side is wrong. This will not suffice. You need to explain why it is wrong. Because if you just say that it is wrong, I as the adjudicator will not understand why is it wrong, right? So you need to like mechanistically explain why the characterization of the other side is wrong. Question the characterization the way you question any other argumentation mechanization. Like in the future slides, I'll be like showing you what how a mechanization functions. It will like become easier for you to rebut mechanizations of characterizations uh, when you read those. After rebutting the characterization, it is also important for you to provide a counter characterization which supports your case. Because now you said that, oh, the characterization of the government is wrong. So, what is the characterization? Now, you propose your own characterization that this world looks in this particular manner. Russia, the like administrative system of Russia is not like this, but like this, and justify that particular characterization. Uh, Engage with their like best case scenario also, and explicitly mention this. Sometimes what happens is that rebuttals do not work. Rebuttals are not accepted by the adjudicator, and you can never know whether a particular rebuttal is accepted by the adjudicator or not. So what is good to do in this particular scenario is you take the best case scenario of the opposition and rebut the best case scenario of the opposition. What I mean by this is that, let's say the opposition says uh, the administrative system of Russia is declining and it is becoming a failed state. This is a characterization. uh, and then I come up and say that, oh, what the opposite, like what the other side said, is completely false. It is, yes, dictatorial in nature, but it is extremely strong because the head of state has a huge amount of power and he's able to control everything that is happening. Right. This is a characterization which I might, like the other side might give to rebut the characterization of the other person. But what might sometimes happen is that the adjudicator might accept the characterization of the other side. So what you need to explicitly do is assume that yes, the characterization of the other side is correct, and then say that assuming that this characterization is correct, then also their arguments do not function, and then rebut those arguments. These are layers to arguments. So what you initially do is rebut, and then you say, okay, even if this rebuttal does not work, then in that particular scenario, uh, even if we hypothetically assume that what the government is saying is correct, then also their argument does not function. This is like taking like their best case scenario and rebutting their best case scenario. You will like get to know more about this particular line of reasoning and mechanization and rebutting best case scenario in the future sessions. Probably the session that will happen tomorrow or day after. So like the other speakers will deliberate on this later. Certain nuances, rejection of extreme cases. As I explained earlier, you cannot like have an extreme case because there can also be there can always be exceptions. Take the most generalized case, which is like probabilistically very likely, right? Any doubts on these two, three slides?
So,
Yes.
when we are saying our argument, when we are characterizing an object, do we need to rely more on the factual side or on the emotional side of the argument?
I think that depends on the debate, right? You can go for facts also, on emotions also. Sometimes emotion works, sometimes emotion do not work. Facts most of the times work, right? So like what I'd recommend is that whenever you're like giving characterization, give a very factual characterization, and if you like need to add emotional pumps in there, emotional characterization in there, you can add them. uh Factual always work. Factuals cannot be contested, so always go for factuals and also add emotional.
Thank you, sir.
Perfect. Now, after this, I'll be like moving to mechanization, which is a completely different topic. So all doubts of characterization will be taken now. Yes, you can just shoot your questions.
So this slide, certain nuances, this
Yes.
makes
Do I explain this? Cool. So I thought I covered this earlier only. That is why I skipped this particular slide. Um, Characterizations can be extreme also, right? I can give a very extreme characterization about a particular motion. That will not hold because the opposition will come up and say that, oh, this is a very extreme characterization. This does not usually happen in real world. But in real world, what is like the middle ground happens, right? Usually, something which is more neutral, something which is more moderate happens, and something which is extreme does not happen. And the general characterization is not usually extreme. So, like, avoid extreme characters. It is important to highlight that there are specific examples that are either probabilistically unlikely or can be rejected. So, like, don't give these examples because these are like very specific examples which are not relevant to the debate. So, these are the like certain nuances you need to take into account. Understand that your examples are generic, understand that your characterizations are generic, and then give the characterization. Don't give very, very niche extremist characterizations or examples. Any other doubts? I'll assume there are none. I'll go to mechanizations. Mechanization, what are they? You'd have like learned that analysis is very important for any motion, right? For any argument. Whatever argument you give, you need to have multiple layers of analysis to it so that so that the adjudicator can accept it, so that you're able to explain it fully. Mechanization is just a part of that analysis. Like it is just a chain of statements interconnected to each other via causal relationships that are necessary to prove a given assertion. Um, for example, I drop a pen right now, and that particular pen falls down. Why does that happen? Because of gravity. Gravity is the mechanization of this force, cause and effect. The cause, like the action was that I left the pen from my hand. The effect was that the pen fell onto the ground. What was the cause? The cause was gravity. Right. That is the mechanization. So as simple as it goes, when like justifying things by giving logical links is mechanization. It tries to establish a cause effect relationship between two claims and prove its higher likelihood. Since, as I explained earlier, debates are highly subjective, mechanization might not necessarily establish the absolute truth. It might not like establish the binary, but it seeks to prove a strong likelihood of a particular event. Let's say you say A is true because B, right? So you need to show a very strong relationship and justification as to why B causes A. And for proving that why B causes A, you can have like various statements connected to each other, various justifications connected to each other, various layers of analysis to that. And that essentially is mechanization. How do you mechanize? First, you need to prove that incentives exist to fulfill a particular mechanization. Um, let's say you are trying to move a particular mechanism. The actors who are probably stakeholders in that particular mechanization need to have an incentive to implement that mechanization, which means that whatever you're proving, the actors must have some kind of uh, motivation to conduct that, right? So you need to prove the incentive behind the mechanization. Second, prove that alternative incentives either don't exist or our incentive is more strong, which means that there can be multiple incentives of a particular actor, right? For example, an actor wants to get rich. I want to get happy. I want to be in a particular relationship, right? These are like multiple incentives to carry out multiple actions. What you need to prove is that what your incentive is, the incentive of your mechanization is the most appropriate and the strongest incentive. And like although other incentives exist for that particular actor, what you are proposing is the best incentive, and that will prevail over the other incentives of that particular motion. Right. The third part is that once you have established that okay, the incentive exists, you also need to prove that you are able to implement that mechanization and the mechanization is very feasible. I want to be a millionaire and I have an incentive to become a millionaire because why not? I can like enjoy my life. Right. But can I become a millionaire? That is an important question. So once you have proved the incentive that I want to become a millionaire, you want to establish that I can become a millionaire via some kind of mechanization, right? So that justification you need to do. So once the incentive exists, you need to prove the mechanization. Then you also need to prove the non-existence of alternative outcomes. Let's say uh, I have an incentive to become a millionaire. So for becoming a millionaire, I join IIT, right? and that will make me a millionaire. Is it like a very plausible conclusion? No. There are like alternate outcomes also. And an outcome can be that probably I don't get a placement. I do not become a millionaire. Or probably I go into research. Uh, Probably I go into academia where like the pay is pretty less as compared to quantitative analysis. In that particular like situation, I might not become a millionaire. Right. So although the mechanization is fine, the incentive is present. Other alternative exist. In order to prove your mechanization, in order to justify that your mechanization, your analysis is best, you need to show that the alternative outcomes do not exist. Any question? Mechanization and analysis is a pretty important part of debating. So, like, if you have any questions, you need to get it cleared right now. And if you have any doubts, any questions,
So can you give an example of mechanization, please?
cool. I'll give mechanization examples later on. That I'll cover. Don't worry. Any other example? See none. Right. We need to identify the burden of proof. Uh, what do you mean by burden of proof? It is essentially what you need to prove. As simple as that. Let's say a particular side has to prove. This also counts as an example. A particular side has to prove representation of
हिमांशु सर,
marginalized. Yes.
हेलो हिमांशु सर, मैं कह रहा
Yes.
था सर आपकी कोई बहन है?
I don't see how it is very relevant.
सर इट इज रेलेवेंट, बताओ आपकी बहन है कि नहीं है?
Organizer, can you please mute this
Sorry,
particular
can you
person?
please, sir,
नो आई
can you please
कैन
continue?
प्लीज सर बताइए
You
सर
have
आपकी
41
बहन
minutes.
सर जनता जानना
Just
चाहती
second,
थी
I'll mute the individual.
सर आपको एक चीज सर आप सर आप म्यूट नहीं कर सकते
Sir, you have removed him from the call. You can continue.
Perfect. Apologies. I'll reshare the screen. Cool. So, burden of proof. Let's take the example that you need to prove something. Representation of marginalized social
सर
groups
आप
in
मुझे
film
निकाल
and
क्यों रहे
TV.
हैं सर? सर मैंने आपको क्या बिगाड़ा? मैंने तो बस यही
Uh,
पूछा आपकी बहन है कि नहीं है?
Organizers, can you like moderate this a little bit? Because it will only be possible to conduct a session like this.
Don't worry, sir, we have blocked them. You won't be able to join in. Yes, sir, we have blocked them now. You won't be able to join.
Cool, perfect, perfect. Cool. Example, representation of marginalized social groups in film and TV will lead to less social stigma. Let's say there's a marginalized social group, for example, people of color or the LGBTQ people, right? So they are like pretty marginalized socially. Uh, like let's say a particular side has to claim that representation of these people in film and TV will lead to less social stigma. For this, we need to first prove that why representation is good, and we also need to prove that why representation will lead to like less stigma, right? So I think these are the two important things, and when we are able to prove this and like analyze this well, we like identify the burden and like fulfill the burden, and mechanization helps in fulfilling the burden. So the first step that you need to do is, let's say you have a particular claim that you need to prove, you identify what are the burdens to prove in that particular claim. In this claim, I like identify two burdens, then I give some kind of mechanization or analysis as to why that is uh, true. First, I need to mechanize why the representation is good. Probably representation will lead to people seeing them on the big media screens, the big screens, and it will become pretty normal for them to observe these people, to interact with them, right? Because now they're seeing them constantly, and now if you see someone very constantly on TV screens, you interact with them, you probably appreciate them. What happens is that you start appreciating them, and you start to realize that those people are like humans only. They are people like you, and that is why what happens is that you start accepting those people. Then you need to mechanize the response of people when they observe the underrepresented people being represented. What I explained was an example of this. When I'm observing someone on the big TV screen, I will see like a reduction in social stigma because of understanding the rationalization that these people are also humans, right? It's already 32. I'll try to wrap up as soon as possible, like 10, 15 minutes because the session also started late, right? So, like, this is a form of mechanization analysis. I gave a very surface level analysis right now, but in your speech, when you're giving a 7 minute speech, your analysis has to be more in depth. As I explained earlier, you need to ask multiple whys, multiple questions to yourself in order to get to a good mechanization. Because the answers to those questions, the answers to those whys will be the mechanization, right? Basic things that you need to keep in mind. Never assume. Now, you should never think that a particular claim is very obvious. Try to break that claim down by asking a series of whys. And if you're sufficiently able to answer these questions to an intuitive depth, that argument might be strong, right? And you need to include those answers in your answer to those questions in the mechanizations. Like I gave an example, like killing is bad. That is pretty intuitive. You don't need to. That is a fair assumption to take. But there can be other assumptions that you think are pretty obvious, but are not very obvious, which are pretty normal to you. Pretty like normal when you interact with your friends, when you interact with your family. Uh, for example, what is the problem with polygamy? Right. Uh, Obviously, you might like outright reject this particular claim, this particular ideology that oh polygamy is bad. But when like the other side starts debating and starts probably giving you arguments, you might understand that this is not a very simple claim that you can assume that polygamy is bad. You need to sufficiently justify as to why it might be good or why it is bad, right? So this kind of assumption is like inherently bad, and you need to just um, give examples of not examples but justifications and logical reasonings as to why what you're saying is correct. Don't assume. Assumptions are where like people lose debates, right? Think the case from opposition perspective. During case type, assume that you're the opposition and try to break down your own mechanization from the opposition perspective. Then like rationalize your analysis on the basis of this preemptive rebuttal. Let's say you are three people who are like doing some kind of case preparation. When you're preparing for the case, think that what the opposition might be thinking of, what might be the arguments of the opposition, and what might be the rebuttals that the opposition might come up to your arguments. Right? Let's say you have a particular argument, and that argument has a particular mechanization. What can be the potential flaw in that mechanization? You need to think about that in the preparation time itself. And when you think of the flaw, then you come up that what is the solution to that particular flaw and how can it be solved. When you like come to that particular solution, include that in your mechanization, right? So this will like ensure that your mechanization is very ironclad and it cannot be rebutted. Obviously, there is no argument which cannot be rebutted, but obviously it can make your argument stronger and tougher to rebut, right? Questions.
So can you please differentiate between characterization and mechanism?
Cool. So as I explained earlier, characterization is describing the character traits of an individual or a group of people. Right. Mechanization is analysis. You can do mechanization of a characterization as well. Right. What do I mean by that? As I explained earlier, characterizations are structured in this particular format. When you're justifying a particular characterization, you need to mechanize it as well, right? Because mechanization is just an analysis. You need to prove why something is true. Some similar to how in mathematical proofs, you have like a line of reasoning. Let us assume ABC. Uh, then you perform some kind of mathematical operations on something, and then you prove why that particular assumption is true. That is argument. That is mechanization. You mechanize as to why something is true. So it is as simple as a scientific proof that you like learn in your classes, or a mathematical proof, or a geometric proof as to why the opposite sides of a parallelogram are equal, or probably the opposite angles of a parallelogram are equal. You have various proofs for that, and you have a particular way to prove that. You have certain axioms, and you use those axioms to prove that particular statement. That is mechanization. Similarly, characterization is like a superset wherein you describe people, you describe objects, and then when you're describing that, in order to justify that, like you do some kind of mechanizations. Um, don't take these words like these are just some fancy words: characterization, mechanization, likelihood, probability, etc. But what comes down to it is that you need to explain everything properly. When I say you need to mechanize, you need to explain things to a particular extent that it is very easy for me to understand, and it is easy for the adjudicator to understand. That is all we need to do. Understood?
There is polygamy same as the non-monogamous system or the polyamorous relationships?
That is not quite relevant to this particular thing. I mean, we can obviously discuss about that, but what is it exactly is not really relevant. Considering we are running out of time, let's not like talk about deviate a bit, right? Any other doubts? Like about the content of the about the explanation, because like we can debate on examples as much as we can. Like we can debate for hours and hours, but like we'll not reach to any conclusive conclusion. Yes, doubts.
So how is
So,
mechanization different from argument? If you provide.
Mechanization is different from argument in the sense that argument has many parts. You have the basic claim which you want to prove, and then you have the mechanization of that. Mechanization is a part of an argument. Then you have, after the mechanization, you have the impact. A basic claim can be something you want to prove. Then how you prove it and why it happens is the mechanization. And then what is the impact you derive from it is the impact, right?
Okay.
So mechanization is just a part of the argument.
Yes, yes. So please could you show the slide where it said structure of characterization?
Which slide you're not quite audible.
So where it said structure of characterization. Yes,
Yes.
yes. Thank you, sir.
Oh,
so
you
are
just
we,
wanted to see the slide.
may
Cool.
I ask?
Yes.
So, are we allowed to cross question during the rebuttal? For example, I've asked a question to my opponent and they have already answered. Can I ask a follow-up question?
No, a follow-up question is not possible. But what you can do is like after 15 seconds, you can raise your hand again to ask a question and probably ask a similar question. That is fine. But like a follow-up question is not allowed in debates.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Considering no questions, we'll move on to multiple mechanizations. Your mechanization can be contested by the opposition. That means the opposition can rebut your mechanization and it can fall flat. So what you need to do is that you need to take them at their best and then argue, which means that you show that even if their rebuttal is true, your argument still stands. Okay, so let's see the dichotomy of a vertical argument. Argument has first the claim, then the mechanization, then the impact. The mechanization is the most important thing which supports your argument, right? Your claim. So let's say the claim is the house, then the mechanization is the like building blocks of the house, the base of the house. If the mechanization is destroyed, then the claim is also destroyed, right? Because your claim no longer remains true. So it is usually recommended that you have multiple mechanizations for a particular like claim, so that even if the other side is able to rebut one claim, one mechanization, then the other mechanization stands, right? So, and these mechanizations need to be independent of each other. Why? Because if these mechanizations are dependent on each other, what will happen is that one rebuttal of the opposition can easily take down both mechanizations. But what we want is that only one like mechanization is rebutted and the other mechanization still holds true, right? So if we have multiple mechanizations, the same argument, same impact that we are trying to push, multiple justifications, multiple reasonings, multiple in-depth reasonings, then it is like the argument becomes much stronger and it becomes like very ironclad and becomes very tough to rebut. So this is the basic ideology behind multiple mechanization. So the theory part has ended. We can like discuss one example after this. But before that, I'll take all the questions that you have.
Sir, I wanted to ask that, like, what I understood from mechanization was that it is a link of logical links to prove your point, right? So how can they be independent because they're linked to one another?
True. Great question. When I say multiple mechanization, okay, consider a tree, right? You start from a like node and then you branch off. So if you have a particular mechanization, it is interconnected. But when you branch off, then you can like independently have those two things, right? So those multiple mechanizations are very independent of each other. You have a particular claim. You are justifying that claims in various ways. That is, in one mechanization, you will have logical links, right, which are connected to each other and like which cannot be taken independently. But if you have two mechanizations, in those two separate mechanizations, they will be internally connected via some logical links, but like they will be in total independent of each other. So even if a logical link of one mechanization is broken by the opposition, then the logical links of the other mechanization still remain. Right. That means justifying one thing in multiple ways. Uh, Justifying a particular claim or analyzing a particular claim in multiple ways, although one way is sufficient, you do it in multiple ways so that rebuttals cannot break it.
Okay.
Any other doubts? Any doubts about characterization, mechanization, or anything I explained in this whole session?
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
So, just to like conclude all of this, what I understood personally is that uh, both of these topics are about that we have to get a common ground with our opposition, and that also that while taking the common ground, we certainly don't have to jump onto conclusions, and that we have to. It's like it's all about taking a common ground. Am I right? And like
What do
not
you
assuming
exactly mean
anything.
by the common ground? Like,
Like
okay,
if
common ground is necessary, right? But I think I didn't cover anything about the common ground in this particular session. What do you
no, no,
exactly?
no. Like, if we take the tree analogy, as you just said,
Yes.
like if we have a trunk, and that the trunk then spreads onto the several branches,
Yes.
and if I have to get my opposition to agree with me, then I'll make them come onto the common ground. That is the trunk of the tree. Like, it's kind of complicated, but you get my point.
I understand, right?
Yeah, thank you.
What you're saying is representationally true.
Okay, okay.
You need to like have that common ground, that is even the opposition will agree killing is bad. Opposition cannot say genocide go brr. No, they will not agree to that. They'll not say Hitler was a good individual. They'll not say, oh, let's genocide a whole nation or let's genocide a particular ethnic minority, right? They'll not agree to that. Like this is something that both of the sides can agree to. Now you need to build your arguments in such a way that you start off from those like basic common ground that you just talk about, which is like which can be accepted by both the parties, and then form your arguments, which are dependent on those common grounds, so that your argument is like very ironclad.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Any other questions? Perfect. So like I think we can go to example. This is a pretty complex example. So let's go to cool. Let's take this particular example. The House will remove gender categories from major film festivals. Uh, what do you mean gender by gender categories? Right now there are like best female actor, best male actor, etc., etc. So the motion is that the House will remove gender categories. Um, so I think the basic line of the debate in this particular motion will go like the opposition will say that removing gender categories will reduce the representation, and the government can probably say that uh, when you have like categories like men and women, and probably the world like gender is non-binary, it is like a spectrum, you are excluding the other people, right? So I think it like comes down to whether this is actually true or not, right? The opposition can easily argue that representation will be increased, and we can have like two categories like cis male and non cis male, and all the people who are in the LGBTQ plus community and don't categorize themselves as male or female can go to that particular NCM category, and even the females can be included under the NCM criteria like category, and this will lead to a greater representation. And like like you'd remember that we talked about representation and why if we like put underrepresented categories into the onto the big screen, it will lead to people accepting them because now they see that these people are also normal individuals, normal humans. They will rationalize that these people are also like us. There is no difference between us and these individuals. They will probably like their acting, and that is why since like they will like their acting, they'll stop hating the communities. And when this happens, what will happen is that they will start getting integrated in the society. And when they start getting integrated into the society, what happens is that they start feeling good. They are provided the basic rights. There is no discrimination against them. They are not oppressed, etc., etc. I think this is a pretty basic common ground, that is discrimination and oppression of minorities and like unrepresented people should be removed, right? They should have equal rights, etc., etc. This is a common ground which can be agreed by both the parties. So when we have this basic axiom, right, and I'm able to prove that my argument leads to this basic axiom, or my argument is derived from this basic axiom, I think it is a pretty solid argument. So this is an example of mechanization that I just proved, right? What is most important is that you start asking whys. Uh, as a novice debater, I like never used to ask whys and just like go on with my arguments and like have like some points to those. But as soon as I started asking whys, I started to realize that things which are very obvious to us right now might not be obvious to all the individuals, or probably might not be obvious to the opposition side, because they might be able to come up with rebuttals because it's their job to oppose us, right? So uh, having a bias or having some kind of obvious bias is wrong. So start asking why, start asking critical question to yourself so that you're able to get to that axiom, get to that like depth, get to that depth of mechanization which you are able to prove or justify very well. And once you're able to do that, it will be very easy for you to prove basic stuff, prove your arguments, prove your claims. And when you do that, you make a very strong argument, and the chances of winning and chances of other side rebutting that decreases. Like you'd have seen that I went down levels in this particular mechanization. First, I proved that what will happen when representation happens. Then I started to analyze it from the perspective of a common individual, and that common individual being any person who is like watching these movies, shows, etc. Then I said that what will be the psychology of that individual when this kind of interaction happens. When I like explained the psychology, I showed what will be the impact of that psychology and that behavior on the underrepresented groups. And like if we go into this like amount of depth, it like becomes very tough for the opposition to probably argue and probably rebut your points. So this is a sample of mechanization. I think we are getting pretty late, so I'll not be discussing the other examples, but I think we can share the slides with you guys so that you're able to practice by taking these examples. Do you have any questions? Considering no questions, I think we can conclude this particular session.
Right, sir. Thank you so much for that wonderful session. Everyone, we'll share the feedback form in a short time with you all. So if you have any feedback for today's session, please do give us. It will be an anonymized form, so need not worry about it. All right, good to go. See you all later in tomorrow's session. Bye.
Ma'am,
Thank you, sir.
when will be able to send the recording of this meeting?
Yeah, so for the recording, just let's see. We'll be sending the recording of yesterday's session in just a few minutes, and this recording for this session also should be available to you in the next few hours.
Thank you, ma'am.
No worries. Anything other than that? Or shall I end this call?
The PPTs will be shared, right?
Yes, the PPTs will be shared.
Okay, thank you.
No worries. All right, so I just end this call. Okay, bye bye.
Excuse me, is there
Yes,
the
yes.
recorded session of the recorded last session available?
Yes, the recording of the last session is available and will be shared to you in just a few minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.